In this video, I'm going to be constructing the two forward engine room vents. The first one is just a simple square structure. The second one is larger and more elaborately shaped. It appears to have a room on the front of it. Both of these will be replaced with Photo-etch from the FlyHawk Super Detail upgrade kit. I did have a look at what should be done to this area of the ship according to the HMS Hood Association, and we have a first. There isn't a recommendation for anything to be changed. For the third of these vents, the one that goes just in front of the aft superstructure, there a change will have to be made. But for these two, apparently they actually are fine. So that's new. Starting with the construction of the more complex structure, I need to install these hatches onto the roof of that vent. In order to make this a little bit easier to handle, I'm going to do that installation first, while the roof of that vent is still attached to the Photo-etch fret. Also, to help me keep the hatch aligned with the hole, I'm going to install it while the hatch is open. The opening in this frame is the exact same size of the hole, so if I keep it perfectly aligned with the hole, then the hatch will cover it perfectly as well. After carefully positioning the frame, I then very carefully apply extra thin super glue to the edge and bond it in place. Once bonded in place, I fold the hatch closed. Since all of these hatches have their hinge on the same side, I realized that I had done the installation in the wrong order. I should install the most aft hatch first, otherwise, if I do it in the order in which I did the first hatch, it's going to be obstructed. So on the second row, I did the aft hatch first, closed it up using the same procedure, and then proceeded to install the hatch that goes in front of it. Unfortunately, when it came to closing up this hatch, I realized there was a bit of a problem. And that is that the aft hatch somewhat obstructs the forward hatch, which means it sits a little bit too far forward and then impinges against the superstructure that this whole thing goes behind. That meant I had to remove the two hatches that I installed and redo it in the same order in which I had done the first hatch. That is, install the hatch that goes forward, which butts up right against the superstructure, and then pre-fold the hatches that go aft and install them. This way, everything fits together nicely. The roof of the vent could then be removed from its frets, the edges folded down into position, and glued together using super glue. After removing the sides of the vent, I fold them using my fingers. This Photo-etch has very deep score lines in it, so it folds very easily. Once I have it in an approximate shape, I then place it into the roof and hold it down. While holding it down, I apply extra thin super glue and glue it in place. Once I'm happy with the shape of the structure, I then reinforce the corners with extra thick super glue. Next, I work on the structure that goes forward of it. You can see that this metal has been quite severely tarnished. That is because it was quite curved when I cut it off of its fret, so I took a butane torch to it to soften it up. That allowed me to clamp it in the Photo-etch folding tool and remove that bend. Although it does look terrible at this point, it's all flat, so that tarnished effect was just going to be eliminated as soon as it gets painted, so it's nothing to worry about at all. Since this metal has been annealed, it is very soft now, so I do have to be a little bit careful with it. But in much the same way as for the vent that I previously built, it does fold very easily since the score lines are very deep. But there is one other little problem with this structure, and that is that there are actually gaps between the panels. That means I have to fill these gaps with something. Fortunately, extra thick super glue does this job quite well. I apply a lot of extra thick super glue to the inside of this component. In a way, because the metal is so soft, this glue is going to give it some strength when it dries, and that glue will also very easily fill that gap between the panels. And once painted over, you won't really notice it. So it's not such an issue. When folding this component, I start with the 90 degree or almost 90 degree corners. That is because that will give me the best chance of getting the edges to be vertical. And also, as soon as I put a corner on it like that, it gives the component a lot more strength. Start at one end, fold the corners. Then once all four sharp corners are folded, this little corner in the middle, which is more of a deflection, can be done. Since the four primary corners of this component have already been folded and glued into position, these two sides for the slight bend are basically already in the correct position, so I just hold them steady and apply the extra thick super glue to the inside of the component. To speed things up, as I apply the glue, I've been adding in some super glue accelerator just to make sure that the glue sets instantly. These two structures can now be attached to each other. First, I apply a small drop of extra thick super glue to the back of one of the components, and then I place them on the cutting mat and bring them into contact with each other. There's a gap in the overhang of the roof that helps me be sure that they are aligned correctly. Once tacked together, I then reinforce the bond with more extra thin super glue. Next, I'll construct the square vent. In this case, I'm gluing the sides of the vent to the roof while the roof is attached to the photo-etch. This is just going to make it a little bit easier for me to handle it. This roof has a nice clean edge cut into it, such that when the sides of the vent drop into it, it almost clips into place. This holds everything perfectly vertical. I also really appreciate that the walls are attached to this square base. It just actually makes the construction of these boxes a lot easier. It's strange to say, but sometimes building a box can be a little bit difficult because you might get an edge slightly out of alignment. But by having this groove in the roof and having the sides attached to the square at the base, it makes this trivial. You know when you have it in the right position because it literally does not move. So that's what I've done. It's a bit unfortunate that it's hidden behind my finger, but these sides are very well locked in place. This component is not sliding or moving at all on the roof. So I then just apply extra thin super glue to the edge and bond the sides in place. Once the sides have been bonded to the roof, it can be removed from its fret and the overhang can be folded down into position. Here you can see the very large gaps between the panels of the roof, and I don't like that. There shouldn't be gaps like that, so I need to fill them. In this case, thick super glue does the job quite well. I do put on quite a lot, but that comes off quite easily with a bit of filing and sanding. All of these components are now ready to be painted. Since these are fairly large sections of uninterrupted photo etch, I'm going to do something that you don't often see me doing, and that's spraying things with a metal primer. So that's what this clear coat is. It's just metal primer. Once the metal primer has dried, I then paint everything with XF53, the color that I'm using to represent Hood's superstructure. I do like this larger, very tarnished piece. As you spray on the paint, it's amazing how it just cleans up and looks pristine. It's amazing what a good layer of paint can do to rejuvenate a component. Anyway, that is it. It really does feel like this model is progressing a lot more quickly now. That forward superstructure, man, that took a lot of time. In the next video, I'll be moving on to yet another new area of the ship, the aft superstructure. If you would like to support this channel or see how the ship looks when it is completed, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.